Good day and welcome to Drew's Book Reviews. Today we've got some heavy stuff to go over. We've got a book that deals with some pretty big and important questions. We are talking about Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. This book is all about human gods. Stay tuned. Okay, so Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari. This is the follow-up book to Sapiens. Yuval Noah Harari is a very insightful writer, I find, when talking about these issues. In this book, he attempts to tackle the fundamental questions of where is humanity going and how are we going to get there. So Harari really kind of tackles these ideas about our future, what it means to be human, and the potential extinction of the human species as we evolve into Homo Deus, human gods. That is what this book is about. That is what this book attempts to answer in terms of the questions of where we are going. One thing I love about Harari is he is insightful. He has a way of putting things in a way that really kind of turns the tables on what you're thinking about, how you think about things, and really poses those intriguing questions that really make you think, what if, or hey, I never thought about that before. So he's just really good at writing from that perspective and tackling those questions within his writing, within his book. I loved his book Sapiens. I've got the review for that, I believe, in like 4 parts. I'll link my nonfiction playlist in the description below, so definitely check that out. But yes, Sapiens was one of those books that was rather insightful to me as well. Really enjoyed that one, and I have to say I really enjoyed Homo Deus, Human Gods, essentially a brief history of tomorrow by Yuval Noah Harari. So from the beginning, Harari really focuses on a little bit more of the history, so it's a bit overlapping or redundant in the sense from where we were with Sapiens, but I think it's important to kind of establish that as the foundation for where he envisions humanity going from here. And one of the things I love about what he pointed out, I'm pretty positive. I try to be very optimistic in my outlook of the future. And one thing that he highlights within this book, which I think is really awesome, is this idea and the reality that things like famine, pestilence, war, crime, poverty, all these things have been on a steady decline for decades. People are living longer, people are living healthier, and people are living better than they ever have in the history of humanity in general. Now, obviously, there are still those segments of society where people are suffering, where people are downtrodden, where life expectancy is still really, really short. There's still people living in extreme poverty. But when we look at the stats, when we look at the numbers, the amount of people living in extreme poverty is much less than it has been historically. And we're making a lot of progress in these areas, and that's just, for me personally, I think this is a very good thing. It's optimistic. It speaks highly of our future if we can continue these trends of reducing crime, reducing war, reducing poverty, just overall bringing people to be in a better life position than they have been. This is a really good thing, and he builds upon this foundation of what we've accomplished as a society. But he also kind of tempers that as well with dire warnings of things like you're more likely to die from a McDonald's cheeseburger and obesity than you are from poverty or war or violent crime, which really kind of helps puts it in perspective. Even there are more suicides globally per year than victims of violence who die from victims of violence. And that's really kind of something to keep in mind and put in perspective here. So it's kind of tempered with, yes, we've made great progress here, but now we're in a situation where obesity and overeating essentially and things like suicide are a bigger threat to our health and well-being than war, violent crime, and poverty, just speaking on a global scale. Now obviously these things are going to vary by the region. There are going to be regions of the world in which things like violence and crime and war and poverty are still very, very real and epidemic proportions and need to be dealt with. Yuval's really kind of taken this more of a global picture, not just a localized regional picture, but on the global scale. So it's not to minimize the suffering of those that are suffering, but to kind of try and put it in perspective in a global picture. And I think he does that well within this book. And he addresses that in an effective way. So that's kind of the aspect that I enjoyed of that. But he also talks much about our future, which, as the book title suggests, it is a brief history of tomorrow. So we discuss how we've accomplished so much and how we've evolved and changed in our knowledge, our technology, since the Industrial Revolution, and how that has brought about a dramatic change in the capabilities and capacities of the human mind. And that is an aspect where he kind of delves into this idea of us potentially becoming these human gods. So Homo Deus, he talks a lot about technological integration within our biology. Things like bionic limbs, how our cell phones, we're basically addicted to our cell phones these days, and how there's technology that has been developed to basically go in there and change your mood, your mind, enhance our intelligence, and bionic limbs and things like that. So it's kind of on the verge of becoming like these superhumans, and what that means for humanity and how that is going to change the dynamic of our entire human species. So part of this development in technology that he's referencing is this idea that much of our modern technology has surpassed the ability and expectations of the ancient gods of the biblical era. In terms of things like modern agricultural technology, whereas before we had to sacrifice our animals to the gods in order to ensure that we had rains for our crop. Well, now with irrigation technology and other technology when it comes to agriculture, we have surpassed that ability. We no longer need to sacrifice to ensure that our crops grow, because we have the technology to make crops grow almost anywhere on the planet now. So we have this ability, we surpass the ability of the gods in that sense. Same thing with like telecommunications. There's in the Bible, in the biblical days, you always had to have some kind of messenger, whether that was an animal, a prophet, somebody, to try and deliver the message to the masses. But with modern media, we've surpassed that. We could send a message across the globe instantly, essentially, through telecom technology, our cell phones, internet, that kind of thing. And so we've really kind of surpassed the ancient gods in terms of technological prowess and ability. And this is kind of an indication from Yuval's perspective that we're progressing towards a state of becoming human gods. And even with our biochemical medicine, with things like specific drugs targeting our brain chemistry to enable us to experience emotions that maybe were to cover up emotions that maybe we don't want to experience, with medical drugs to deal with things like depression and things like that. So it's really kind of bringing about this idea of modern technology. Humans are advancing at a rapid pace, especially when it looks at kind of blending the technology and the biology together. It kind of gives me like this Star Trek Borg vibes as far as what's happening here, which is kind of a assimilation into the modern technology, a cross blend between the biology, technology, implants, we've got artificial organs, bionic limbs. Artificial intelligence is a big thing with this that he touches on and talks a lot about the advancement of artificial intelligence to the potential for computers to become these conscious entities. And are we literally developing, programming, and manufacturing our replacements, which could inevitably lead to the extinction of humanity? So with these developments, is the future superhuman, as Yuval puts it, potentially going to be the cause of our own extinction? And that's really a question that he poses. Now, I'm not sure that I'm totally on board with that idea myself. It's definitely not something that I spend a lot of time thinking about, but it's an intriguing idea nonetheless, as far as where that's coming from. and what we are doing. So one of the things that he mentions here, and just another quote here, we're suddenly showing unprecedented interest in the fate of so-called lower life forms, perhaps because we're about to become one. So when referencing that, talking about how we treat our farm animals and our food animals for consumption, and that more and more there's a growing awareness of how these animals are treated with our farming communities. And are we showing an interest in this and their fate as lower life forms because we ourselves are on the precipice of becoming a lower life form ourselves? So that's just kind of the whole concept behind this book, and I think overall it is a well-written book. I think that it demonstrates some intellectual thought behind it. I think it's well written. I think Yuval's really good at putting things in perspective when it comes to dealing with this particular subject matter and the future of humanity. You know, that being said, I don't necessarily agree with everything that Yuval has written or said. And while I find his writing to definitely be insightful in the ideas he presents, it's not something that I can fully align myself with personally. Some of the things that he does within this is he conflates these political ideas with being religions. So things like communism, Nazism, liberalism, humanism. So he refers to these things as religions, something that I personally disagree with. I don't view communism or Nazism or liberalism or humanism as religion. It's just not something that I could agree with personally. And definitely I think that people could certainly take those things and behave with extreme religious vigor and fervor and, you know, basically become fanatics under these ideologies. I don't think that, for me at least, I don't see that as a religion. It's a bit of a nuanced position. People have different ideas of what constitutes a religion. It could be very broadly and widely defined. And so everybody has these different ideas. That's just one area where I personally disagree with the whole concept of political philosophy being a religion. So that for me is just one thing that I disagree with. Some other parts of the book where he was kind of discussing this humanism, that is something that kind of fell flat for me in some aspects of it. Not all of his discussion on humanism, but some parts I did find a little bit boring, not that interesting. But overall, definitely this idea of humanism, of bettering humanity and humankind, is prevalent throughout this book as we progress towards technological advancement, both biochemical and technological integration for that. And definitely we are living in the age of information, so one of the areas that he discusses a bit as well is this idea of dataism, which he also refers to as religion. Again, something I don't agree with necessarily, but dataism being this idea that information and data should be widely spread and freely available to all without cost, and that data has the right, information has the right to be out there. And that's just, it's crazy to think about. I mean, yes, freedom of information, freedom of religion, these are great concepts, but there's this growing trend where people believe that this information should be available to all without paying for it, and without paying the creators of that information. And Google actually, I just watched a documentary about Google Books and how they've been digitizing as many books as they can without paying royalties to the publishers or authors for the rights to distribute that material. And based on this documentary, Google's in a lot of trouble for this. They're facing a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit as a result. So that what Google is doing there seems to be part of this idea of the freedom of information, that this stuff should just be out there without respect to who created it. And you know, I'm not going to get into what side of that debate that I'm on. That's not what this channel is about, but that idea is presented within this book as well, and in terms of, you know, growing data and information, how everybody is connected all the time. We got our smartphones, we got our smart lights, we got our smart fridges and stoves and houses. Everything is being connected. The Internet of Things, where literally everything can be connected to the internet all the time. This is kind of a growing trend within our culture, within our society. We're on the verge of giving up a lot for the sake of convenience and being constantly connected. And that's kind of where we come back to this whole cybernetic Borg type mentality. Now, of course, Yuval doesn't use the term Borg or reference the Borg from Trek, but the way he describes it kind of puts that imagery in my mind, that this is his vision for the future and what he believes is coming too. So when it comes to all this data constantly being out there, and just kind of end on one quote by him with respect to that, where he says, in the past, censorship worked by blocking the flow of information. In the 21st century, censorship works by flooding people with irrelevant information. This kind of goes back to being online constantly 24/7, never being disconnected, and always being there. Now, Yuval definitely seems to have this very pessimistic view of humanity's future. I'm an optimist. I am definitely not seeing our future as pessimistic. I do see, of course, technology advancing, lots of great things coming forth with that, but definitely I'm not pessimistic about the future. What I'm seeing in the future, and some of the things that Yuval has mentioned, is the advancement of things like self-driving cars, and how that's going to affect our future. Not just self-driving cars, but increasing AI and automation. So as artificial intelligence continues to progress and advance, as more and more data and information about our personal lives is put out there to be read by these algorithms and databases, increasingly we're going to be continuing to see this increase in automation, and the useless class, as Yuval Noah Harari puts it, begins to come out, where so many jobs are being replaced by machines and computers and AI that can simply do it more efficiently and better. Why do you need taxi drivers or bus drivers when you can have fleets upon fleets of self-driving vehicles? You don't need a taxi driver anymore. You don't need a truck drivers anymore. You don't need any of that anymore. Some systems across the world already have automated self-driving trains, for example. I know the SkyTrain in Vancouver is an example of that. There are no train drivers, it's all automated. And it's not that inconceivable that this kind of technology and abilities are being extended beyond that. I mean, we already know that Google has their self-driving cars. And this is only one aspect or one industry that we're seeing artificial intelligence, computer algorithms replace the human jobs. And it's just getting started. This is really only the beginning. And while I don't agree with Yuval on things like us becoming like this Borg-like species necessarily, and again, I emphasize Yuval did not use the term Borg, he didn't reference the Borg, it's just my own interpretation of what I read into what he's saying. So, maybe I'm completely wrong, but that seems to be the kind of picture he's painting with that. But I do see this idea of this useless class coming to be a reality. More and more we're seeing things being taken away, being changed, modified, artificial intelligence come in, and more we're seeing automation in a lot of jobs. So what that holds for the future, I don't know. I don't know how that's going to play out, but regardless of that, even though I could see that happening, that aspect of it, the whole useless class happening, being unemployable because everything's automated, I still have a lot of optimism for the future. And I think, and I feel that we've got a lot of potential, and that our future is much brighter than Yuval paints a picture of. So he definitely seems to be very pessimistic about the future, but I'm very optimistic about the future. That being said, I think his writing is good. I think the book is a great analysis of the technological advancement and the potential for human future. In fact, one of the things that he says within the book is, this is not prophecy. This is only a potential future. This is paraphrased, of course. This is only a potential future that we have the means to stop, think, and consider if this is what we want for the future of humanity. And we have the opportunity to change our course for the better, and to change our course to prevent this future from happening. And I think that's a really important note. It's like we could allow this to happen, or we could change our course for the future to prevent it from happening. And I'm really glad he threw that in there, because otherwise it probably would have gotten a lower rating. I think he's kind of just saying, look, this is the kind of thing that's happening. This is the potential that we have. So the question is, do we continue pushing forward without regard for the future, without regard for humanity, without regard for the potential of how this is going to change humanity? Or do we stop, we think about where we're at now and where we want to go from here, so that we can make sure that we become the best humanity that we can be? And so that pessimism is kind of tempered with the idea that we can be better than what he feels we are becoming. I think that's good there. And overall, I have to say, really good read. I really enjoyed it. This was a great book, and I'm really glad that I picked it up. And I do look forward to reading more from Yuval Noah Harari. I gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars review on Goodreads. And I've also, of course, got his book, 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, on my TBR list. If you haven't seen my nonfiction TBR video, definitely check it out here on the channel. Like I said, overall, I think this is a great book. I think it's a really good read. He is insightful and very intellectual in his approach, and he kind of tempers that with some cautions, with some things saying, look, I'm not going to say that this is for sure a future. But it is a potential future that we should all be mindful of, and that's great. And overall, I love his book and his writing, and I don't expect I'm ever going to agree with him on things 100%, but that's okay. I don't want to live in this. I don't want to live in an echo chamber. I want to see the alternate point of view to kind of help grow my own perspective. And so those are my thoughts here on Homo Deus. Those are my thoughts on Homo Deus, a brief history of tomorrow. This was a really great read. Really enjoyed it, and it's just a great book all around. So yeah, if you've read it, let me know what you think. Drop your comments below. And so this was kind of rambling all over the place, a little bit incoherent, but there you have it. There's my thoughts on Homo Deus. Thanks so much for watching. And don't forget to hit that like button, comment, and subscribe. And we'll see you next time on the next episode of Drew's Book Reviews. Until then, keep on reading. Bye.